I'm Mick Alberts. This is video 3 of the Create a Picture Viewer in C# video. If you haven't seen the first 2 videos, consider watching those before you watch this one. In this video, you'll learn how to rename controls, add event handlers, and add dialog box components to a form. First, I want to rename the button controls in the application. You may have noticed that Visual Studio automatically named them Button 1, Button 2, and so on. I'm going to refer to these button names in code, so it will be useful to rename them so that I can more easily know which button each name corresponds to. So I'll click the button I want to rename to select it, and then find the Name property in the Properties window. It will be near the top of the list if you have your properties organized alphabetically. I'm going to call this one Close Button, with no space in between the 2 words. If I were to add a space, Visual Studio would display an error message. And I'll rename the other buttons as well. I'll call this one Background Button, and this one Clear Button. And I'll call this one Show Button. I can verify that the names have changed by clicking this arrow, and I can see the new names. I'm going to leave the other names as they are because there's no good reason to change them. For example, there's only one checkbox, so I won't have any trouble keeping track of that name in code. Now I want to start adding code that will run when the user clicks the buttons on the form. To do that, I'll add methods called event handlers. They're called event handlers because the program runs them whenever an event, like a user clicking a button or selecting a checkbox, happens. When you double-click a control in the IDE, it adds an event handler method for the control. For example, when you double-click a button, the IDE adds an event handler for its click event, which is called whenever the user clicks the button. When you double-click a checkbox, the IDE adds an event handler for its checked change event, which is called whenever the user selects or clears the box. I'll double-click the Show a Picture button in Windows Forms Designer. The IDE opens a new tab in the main window called the Form1.cs tab. This is the code that the IDE added when I double-clicked the Show a Picture button. This is an event handler called ShowButton_click. This event handler contains code that runs when the Show a Picture button is clicked. Now I am going to go back to the Designer tab by clicking here, and double-click another button to add an event handler for it. I'll repeat this process for all buttons. And I'll do the same for the checkbox to add an event handler called checkbox1_checked_changed. This event handler gets called whenever a user selects or clears the checkbox. Now I have these 5 event handlers in my code. After you add an event handler for a control, you can return to it at any time from Windows Forms Designer by double-clicking the control. Notice the names of the event handlers. When you add an event handler with the IDE, it chooses a name based on the control's name and the event being handled. For example, the click event for a button named Show Button is called the ShowButton_click event handler method. One other detail that I want to make clear at this point. Keep in mind that when you add an event handler by double-clicking a control in the Windows Forms Designer, you are creating an event handler for the control's default event. The control also has other events, and you can create event handlers for those events as well. I'll cover that in a later video. Now I want to add some functionality for the Show a Picture and set the background color buttons. When a user clicks the Show a Picture button, an Open File dialog box will open. When a user clicks the Set the Background Color button, a dialog box that enables the user to choose a color will open. To enable this functionality, I'm going to add an Open File dialog component and a Color dialog component to the form. A component is like a control in some ways. You can use the toolbox to add a component to your form, and you set its properties by using the Properties window. But unlike a control, a component isn't visible on the form. It provides certain behaviors that you can trigger with code. First, I'm going to open the Dialogs group in the toolbox. This group has many useful dialog boxes that you can use. I'm going to add an Open File dialog component to the form by double-clicking it. Then I'll add a Color dialog component. Nothing is added to the form, but you can see the components here at the bottom of the Windows Forms Designer. Now I want to show you an Open File dialog box in another application to demonstrate what I want to accomplish. Let's look at what happens in Paint when I click Open on the File menu. See how this list enables me to filter the types of files that I'm looking for? This is what I want to set up in the Picture Viewer application. To do this, I'll set the filter property for the Open File dialog component. I'll click the Open File dialog so that I can set some properties. And here's the filter property. This functionality requires a fairly complicated property setting. Here's what it looks like. You can see that this enables filters for various image types and another filter to show all files. You can take a look at the print version of this video on the MSDN website if you want to copy and paste this property value. The print version of this video is titled Step 7, Add Dialog Components to Your Form. I have the property setting on my clipboard and I'm just going to paste it in. I also want to set the title property of the dialog box to Select a Picture File. Notice how the title and filter properties are bold in the Properties window. The IDE does that to show you any properties that have been changed from their default values. I'll conclude this video here. To continue creating this project, see the fourth video of this tutorial. In that video, you'll start writing code.